Coming up on Theater Talk.
The Tonys, are so full of sort of conflicts of interest, the way that they vote for these, because you have all these sort of road presenters who are voting for Best Musical, and then they want that Best Musical winner in their house, across the country, and so they want a show that'll pull in a lot of money.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm the producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Michael, your chief competitor in the world of journalism is here today.
I have no competitors. Who are you talking about?
The wonderful Patrick Healy from the New York Times, who's sitting right here looking so wonderful.
We thought we would bring you up to speed on some of the goings-on behind the scenes on Broadway right now with our dear friend Patrick Healy of the New York Times, who is a spirited and friendly competitor of mine over at the paper. Welcome back to Theater Talk, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Spider-Man is the musical that is always in the headlines. And recently, you and I were writing about it because we are in the midst of these lawsuits between Bono and The Edge and Julie Taymor. What's the latest on the legal tussle between Taymor and Spider-Man?
Sure, they're going back and forth on these settlement talks. Nobody wants to have either Bono on a stand in January 2013 talking about showing up. We do. They don't want Bono on the stand talking about showing up at meetings.
Drunk with supermodels.
Apparently, yeah, tipsy with supermodels. Julie doesn't want to get on the stand and have to face all of these allegations and email that she was difficult to work with, that she was sort of throwing diva fits. No, exactly. So there's not a lot of upside for anybody to go on. So they keep going back and forth. The thing is, as you've written about and I've written about, there's a lot of money at stake. People have stopped talking about whether the show will ever make its money back and started talking about how it could turn into this franchise that would run in arenas around the world in sort of concert versions. So there's a lot of money at stake. There's also, and you and I think probably are hoping this will come out someday, the documentary of the making of Spider-Man that one of the producer's sons,
Jacob Cole, the son of Michael Cole.
Yeah, he filmed it.
He's got everything. He's got fights. He's got everything.
Everything. He's
but
got a lot of meetings.
But isn't Michael Cole being sued big time on this?
Michael Cole's being sued by Julie to give her either some kind of approval or to stop it. So there's just a lot of elements at play and a lot of things they don't want to come out.
We should say Jacob Cole, Michael Cole's son, has been filming this thing, and he's captured all of these fights and feuds that we've written about. And Julie, in her lawsuit, is seeking to stop that movie from ever being released.
Well, can you blame her?
It's it's a very interesting legal issue because she's a public figure.
Did she sign the release?
I'm told she had signed releases way back when because it was going to be a promotional movie for the thing.
And now that it's the producer's son, the producer who she's at war with, she has no control over how she's portrayed. She probably has moments in which she comes across, sort of the dutiful, hardworking director while Bono and Edge are off in Australia making money on U2. But then there are also probably moments where she's, sort of pulling
I don't give a bleep what the audience thinks. Those kind of moments that she's quoted in one lawsuit. This issue of the money of Spider-Man is interesting to me, though, because do you believe the show really could ever make any money in New York?
The merchandising has been huge. I mean, that is selling for them in a pretty hot way. Ticket sales, it's interesting. There's a huge amount of walk-up business. Now, I think probably a lot of that is discounted, so it's hard to imagine, but that said, I didn't necessarily think it would be running into possibly 2 or 3 or 4 years, but now it looks like it has real staying
But even then, I mean, the capitalization is what, $75 or $80 million? The running cost is 1.1, 1.2. So even if they're grossing 1.3 million, the profit that week is only $100,000. You got to run a long time to make back $80 million if you're only making $100,000.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think their long-term view is to have these overseas concerts where they only play, instead of running for years and years in London, they have like a 5-night stand somewhere and they try to pack in 10,000 people, 20,000 people into an arena.
But how's that going to work safety-wise?
Well,
they can injure people from one end of the globe to the other.
Now, getting back to the case, the thing I always wonder is, why don't they just pay Julie Taymor the $2, give her the money she wants, give her the credit she wants, and forget about it? It seems so spiteful on whatever she did. you know, she was the auteur coming from the beginning. Then, you know, I know her co-writers conspired against her, it is said, to write a second script.
Oh, that
Berger,
little
right.
Glenn Berger, the
But-
whole Judas of the whole thing,
But-
who Julie plucked out of obscurity and practically poverty to be her co-writer, and then he turned on her and was secretly rewriting the script behind her back.
There's a lot of secrecy and conspiracy
Lot of
going on.
conspiracy.
The anger, Susan, is
Yes,
unlike
that's-
anything I've seen in my 3 years in the job.
Their-
Michael,
and
I have
their
a
anger
different
against
reference point.
her.
Their anger against her, they are furious at her. They're furious that she unloaded all of these email against Bono, email that she knew was going to get under his skin, but mostly that she is still parading around as they see it, saying, I'm the director of this big success story. They didn't do much work in this overhaul, and that she's still sort of sticking in their side. Now, from her point of view, she was the one who was, you know, originally thwarted by this coup plotting behind her back, these people who were allegedly her friends. I mean, you know the way, you know, these egos work. Bono and Edge and Julie thought they were, you know,
Friends
the brilliant
forever,
and the brilliant
collaborate.
artists, you know, who were so much above what everyone else was doing on Broadway. They were doing something new and brilliant. And, you know, the idea that they would sort of stab her in the back, which she absolutely feels,
Well-
is, you know, still sticking in her.
Going back before she was, you know, whacked, when they started promoting this thing, and you had photos of her and Bono and the Edge,
Sure.
showing them working together, and then all of a sudden he's saying, oh, well, I wasn't there. And, you know, for anyone who'd been following the publicity, you looked and said, well,
Well,
you've been presenting it that way.
The one thing I always found extraordinary was Bono and the Edge have tried to pretend that the fiasco, Julie's version, the fiasco version, they had nothing to do with it.
Right, right.
Right.
Well, we weren't really around. They wrote I'm sorry. They wrote
The bleeping.
They wrote the show with her for 9 years. They worked on it.
Right.
You're
And
trying to
they
tell me they
were-
had no idea that she created this character called Arachne?
And
No,
then
and-
they
and
went away and let
let
her
him
do
talk.
it. Yeah.
Sure, and all last fall, and all during the fall of 2010, they were having you know, interviews with the media over dinner in which they were, you know, stroking each other's egos so much and talking about each other's brilliance. And Bono and Edge said several times to me that they had read the script, they were enthusiastic, they thought Julie and Glenn had come up with this great story. This was something that was going to reinvent all of Broadway. And they were all in on this. So the idea that somehow they didn't have anything to do, what they didn't have anything to do with was they were away during that December when
All hell was
you know,
breaking loose.
yeah,
when
Chris
people-
Tierney fell 30 feet when the woman who's playing Arachne got whacked in the head by the rope. And Julie has these emails in which she's saying, come back,
Help
I need
me."
your help. And, you know, they were down in Australia making money with
making
you too.
billions on YouTube.
So they would
but you're-
rather spite her than and have a court case than just pay her.
No. You suspect a settlement, don't you?
I suspect a settlement from everything that I've heard. I mean, I think it would be pretty unusual just, you know, the way these lawsuits go for them all to be on the stand.
Yeah, I can't see that. No, I think they've had to sort of thump their chest and hit each other. She hit them, they hit her. She's come back and hit them. They might run her down again one more time, and then I think they'll probably settle.
Right. I mean, the thing that'll be interesting is just how deep does the anger go? I mean, for Jerry Harris and Michael Cole, the producers, to come up with a settlement that looks somehow good and warm feeling for Julie is going to take a lot for them, and I don't think they're there yet temperamentally. So
Well, Michael Cole, who's a big guy in the rock business, lawsuits are part of the game of his.
Sure.
He's been involved in all sorts of lawsuits all the
sure.
time. You know,
Yep.
it's just a club that you use. It's part of your business.
Yep, absolutely.
So, just a couple of other things I want to touch on. Surprisingly, Patrick, we have this show from Disney called Newsies that seems to be doing quite well on Broadway and sort of coming from nowhere and could be a contender for the Tony Award.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be probably a Newsies face-off with Once for the best Tony.
And Once is
musical.
this little show based
Once
on
is-
the independent.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it reminds me a little bit of my first year in the Beat when you had Billy Elliot, sort of the big show, and Next to Normal, you know, this little show that came from Off-Broadway that was full of feeling and intimate, whereas Billy Elliot, you had sort of the big singing, the big dancing, and also the show that could tour, which a lot of the Tony voters, you know, want. They, you know, the Tonys, you know, are so full of sort of conflicts of interest, the way that they vote for these, because you have all these sort of road presenters who are voting for Best Musical, and then they want that Best Musical winner in their house, you know, across the country, and so they want a show that'll pull in a lot of money.
I think Disney which had been battered a bit here because people didn't like Little Mermaid and they didn't like Tarzan, which was terrible.
Absolutely.
And I don't, even though Mary Poppins is a hit, I don't think it was really embraced by the theater world. But people seem to genuinely like Newsies. And Disney is very good, because they've been through these Tony campaigns before, at going through these campaigns, and they have all this money to buy many tables at your benefits and show up at all this kind of stuff, and just remind people of how powerful and helpful they can be.
The voters come to town. They love to be wined
That's
and
right.
dined. They love to have, you know, their egos and their reputation stroked. I mean, Disney is first among
You could
equals.
just see these voters coming to town, and Tom Schumacher at Disney throwing a big lavish lunch for them at the Four Seasons, with all the newsboys coming in to serve them. The poor ones people like, well, here's our CD.
Well, that's the thing. Newsies has that sort of young, energetic, attractive
And I'm not
cast.
going to Tom Schumacher's lunch, and Newsies is just so fun.
I mean, Newsies has gotten the best reviews, I think, of any Disney show since The Lion King.
Well, it
It's
is
gonna
the
be-
best of
Yeah,
the
it's going to
Disney
be
shows
it's going to
since
be
The Lion
very
King.
hard to beat. The thing about Once, I suppose, is that it's a great date show.
It's
I
lovely.
think it's very,
Yeah.
you know, it sort of has a romantic, you know, sort of full heart feeling.
Is there a stealth candidate here in Nice Work If You Can Get It, the Matthew Broderick old Gershwin show that they're hauling out there?
I think that's the one to keep the eye on. The Gershwins are having a pretty incredible year of sort of repurposing
Right,
their classic shows to get
With
out
Porgy
there
and
make
Bess that they
money
have
with,
out there.
you know, with Porgy and Bess.
When Audra shows up, by the way.
We'll
Audra
see.
McDonald missed 10 performances, which really threw them for a
wow.
loop. But
We'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, there's, you know, Leap of Faith is coming in. There's sort of these other shows, but it
Ghost.
seems like it's going to be Ghost.
Yeah.
You know, but I think, I mean, Nice Work If You Can Get It, so one to keep an eye on.
yeah, but I suspect it's going to be a Newsies Once race. That's just my feeling. Any good plays out there you'd like to call viewers' attention to? If they're coming to New York and
I'm
they might
pretty
wanna see?
excited about seeing The Lions up in the Court Theater. It's
Nikki
coming from
Silver's play with
Off-Broadway.
Linda
Nikki
Lavin.
Silver's play with Linda Lavin. End of the Rainbow has this performance that is pretty magnetic in
I saw
terms
it,
of in terms of Tracy Bennett playing Judy Garland.
Yeah.
That race, after a couple years where it was really the men categories that were doing well in acting, I mean, this year for Best Actress in a Play, you probably have Tracy Bennett for End of the Rainbow,
Definitely.
Stockard Channing,
Linda
Other
Lavin.
Desert Cities, Linda Lavin, maybe Nina Arianda from
For
Venus and Fur, maybe Cynthia Nixon for Wit. I mean,
And
it's-
Rosemary Harris.
and Rosemary Harris from Road to Mecca. I mean, you've got those are six that you know will be pretty tough. And then One Man, Two Governors.
Very
it's
funny play.
Very, very funny. And it's interesting, all these new plays opening, something like 10 new plays between late March and late April. There aren't actually a lot of, you know, pure comedies, and One Man, Two Governors would fit that.
It's going to make a big star of James Corden, the kid who is the lead there. I know that the producers of One Man, Two Governors, Nick Heitner from the National Theater who directed it, they want it to be considered a revival. In which case, then it will go head to head with Death of a Salesman,
Death of a
Mike
Salesman.
Nichols' production of Death of a Salesman. It'll be interesting to see how the Tony Committee rules on that. Because One Man, Two Governors is based on the old
I know.
Goldoni play, The
I
Master
know,
of Few
but-
Servants, and they're going to petition to be a revival.
I did a story in the National Theater last summer and reread Servant of Two Masters before seeing One Man, Two Governors. They're very, very different plays, so that'll be an interesting one.
I don't think
Scott
that
Rudin would like One Man, Two Governors to be considered a new play, so he's got a clear
Yeah,
shot.
absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, that best play category will be tricky. I mean, Other Desert Cities has been.
That seems to be the favorite.
It's the favorite, but you know, our favorite show, Clyburn Park, is coming in. You know, now to Broadway. It won the Pulitzer last year for Best Drama. It's got, you know, there's a lot of sort of meat on that in terms of both comedy and.
I think One Man, Two Governors, no matter which way the committee rules, can upend the race. I mean, if it goes to revival, then I think Death of a Salesman has a real struggle on its hands to beat One Man, Two Governors. I think if One Man, Two Governors becomes best play, new play, I think it's a real race between that and other desert cities.
It's interesting because I mean, Other Desert Cities and Clyburn Park are both getting produced regionally around the country. So in terms of the road, I'm not sure if they'll say a One Man, Two Governors is a show that we can bring everywhere the same way that they did with War Horse, which won Best Play last year, which was also from the National Theater.
My sense is that One Man, Two Governors it's so much fun, and it comes in at the right time, just before the Tonys. You know, Clybourne Park, I think, is a little too small, frankly. I think Other Desert Cities has been around a little too long. And so if One Man, Two Governors is a new play, it comes in, and the Tony voters just have that absolutely delightful, delirious time at it, right before they're going to mark their ballots, I think it might carry it.
I mean, it's interesting. One Man, Two Governors had a brilliant first act. That first act was hysterical. And I do remember sitting in Act 2 thinking, how are they going to top Act 1? Whereas the second act, in Other Desert Cities especially, has so much payoff. I mean, you do leave, at least I did, you know, really sent for a loop. Whereas with One Man, Two Governors, I remember coming away thinking, well, that was really funny, but it was really the first act that was terrific.
Well, this is what a horse race is, and we'll be stirring the pot.
Absolutely.
Okay, Patrick Healy from the New York Times, thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Here it comes! Ho-ho-ho! Unveil it, boys!
Oh, it's champagne! Oh, gee, take your viewing the sport.
One of Off-Broadway's great pioneers, Ted Mann, died in February.
Ted was the founder of the Circle in the Square down on Bleecker Street, where they did some very important revivals of O'Neill plays with Jason Robards. And the theater eventually moved uptown to 50th Street on Broadway, where it still is today. Ted was here talking about his life in the theater, and we want to show you a little clip of our interview with him tonight. Ted Mann has written a book about creating that theater, Journeys in the Night, Creating a New American Theater with Circle in the Square. And we're very happy that Ted Mann is joining us on Theater Talk tonight.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Welcome. All right, you can't really overstate your importance in the American theater, because you, along with the great director Jose Quintero, brought Eugene O'Neill, the great American playwright, back to the forefront. What was the first O'Neill play you did at Circle in the Square? And
The Iceman Cometh.
And how did you come? Why did you decide to do that play?
For years, I've been trying to get the rights to an O'Neill play, and every year I would call the agent, would say no. You know, and I said, well, can't we do one of the lesser known? No. And this year, 1956, I called and she said, well, I'm going to ask Mrs. O'Neill.
Carlotta,
yeah. And at that, I had read his plays when I was younger, and I always felt, you know, I had a kinship with it. And also at that time, we were broke, dead broke.
the theater, yeah.
And The Iceman Cometh as a cast of 25, 4.5 hours long. And I thought, if we're going to go down, let's go down big. You know?
I like that way of thinking.
And so she said, Mrs. O'Neill would like to meet you and Jose. And we had read The Iceman and loved it. And as you know, in 1946, it had been done right after World War II. And it was considered a lesser play. You know, the reviews, if you look at them, were kind of like kind.
And the failure of it really broke O'Neill's heart, did it not?
Oh yes, because I mean, I guess he felt that that was one of his great plays. It was also one of his sort of breakaway from his tradition of the style of play that he was writing.
But so you got to meet Eugene O'Neill's widow, Carlotta, to convince her to let you have the rights to Iceman Cometh. How did you do that?
Well, we went, we researched what plays. She had said through the agent, well, which of his plays would you like to do? And I said, well, we'd like to do The Iceman, which we had just discovered. And so when we came in to see Mrs. O'Neill, she was delighted and immediately gave us the rights to do it, not having seen anything of what we were doing at all.
And this is the
But
play.
she's also relayed what you just said, you know, that it had broken his heart.
And so to any resurrection, even though she didn't know who was going to resurrect it, would be a worthy gamble because it had failed so badly in the first production.
Yeah.
And of course, that was launched Jason Robards' career and really established you as the off-Broadway theater movement, because it was Brooks Atkinson who saw that production and gave you the monumentally great review in the New York Times.
Well, but I mean, our connection as a major force, let's say, or the birth of Off-Broadway happened with Summer and Smoke.
Right, Geraldine Page.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Famous production.
And that also had been a play that had failed on Broadway. We hadn't seen it. And we were looking for a play for Jerry Page, who Jose knew from the Goodman School.
Right.
And Jose came one day after looking through lots of scripts and said, I found it. And what did you find? Summer and Smoke. We read it, the rest of the people on the board, and we liked it too. And Jerry was called in, and I said, you know, Jerry, we want you to play Alma. Oh, she said, oh, bless you, now they can hear me. Now they'll hear me, meaning the public, the critics, you know.
Yeah. Was your theater open to the extent that, you know, an actor, a total unknown actor just struggling out there could show up on the doorstep and ask for an audition, try to get in? Were you that open to everybody coming in?
Well, there was a show business paper, and they would always, we'd put something in there about casting, and the people would come. They didn't have to come through an agent. Whoever called, you know, we set up an appointment for them.
What do you think have been being a leader in the off-Broadway nonprofit institutional theater movement, creator of it in many ways? What do you think about our big nonprofit theaters today? I think of the Roundabout Manhattan Theater Club. You were doing O'Neill, you were doing Williams, you were doing plays that had failed, you were taking incredible risks doing this. Nowadays our nonprofits are doing old musicals, sort of sitcom type plays, and it's all about stars. Does that disappoint
Well, some,
you?
I wouldn't say all. I mean, some are
But
doing
a lot
it.
of the big ones are.
Yeah,
Where is that
Roundabout.
sense of adventure that you and Jose had when you were
Well,
creating the theater?
It's the whole thing's totally different. You know, it's like go to dinner at somebody's house. They have served that kind of dinner. Go to somebody else's house. It's very, you know, a lot of people helping and so forth. In our case, we didn't have anybody to help. The nonprofit giving didn't really exist.
Yeah.
So we were doing whatever we could do with whatever money we had. So, and productions at that time cost anywhere. We could do one for probably $2,000.
Yeah.
Today, the same thing would probably cost close to $1 million, $1.5 million or more.
So you've been poor in the theater, and you've been well off in the theater. Did the poor phase stimulate you in a way that
I love challenge.
Yes. So do you think you would have lost? Do you think that the Circle in the Square would have been less if you'd been amply endowed from earlier on? If you'd
I
had
think
more
so,
capital?
Yeah. I think so. I think it's good to have your back up against the wall. And I find for myself, when my back is up against the wall, everything else clears away, and I see that's what we need to do. You know, it's like an instant light comes on.
So necessity breeds invention
I
in
think
the theater.
so.
Yeah.
I think that's true in the art world.
It makes for
certainly
better
with
work.
painters and musicians, composers. You know.
You know, I wanted to ask you one more thing. Before you got it, as you were starting Circle in the Square, you really had been trained in performance space management by working for your father in a jazz club. Isn't that true?
Yeah, well, my father was involved in jazz clubs on 52nd Street, in the early 52nd Street in the time when it was really the jazz clubs. And he was involved with 3 different clubs there. And then it was later when it was with Birdland and Basin Street East. You know, I was watching the interrelationship between the performers and the management, and I learned a lot from that.
What's the best thing you learned about how the management should treat the performers?
Be friendly, be human, be human, and help when you can. Many times people need a little extra money. You know, they got in a debt or something like that. You know.
So you would pass out a little cash from time to time to the actors who were a little pinched?
Sure, yeah.
So that certainly shows dealing with musicians in the jazz world, who's with their erratic lives and always a need for money. You brought that empathy into the theater world, and it served you well.
Also, I liked actors, so it became part of my social life. My wife and myself. My wife was an opera singer.
Yes, very well known.
I was living that side of the world, not being an actor or a performer myself, and it just is a place I like to be.
You know,
with artists.
I think there's a sad strain, though, to all of this in the book. I wonder if it's true that now that the city is so rich, and you have to be rich to live in Greenwich Village, can you have that kind of lively art scene with young people who have no money, who are sleeping on couches and turn in great performances?
Yeah.
Or is that over if you're in a city now that's only for the elite and the rich?
I don't think so. I think just as hard as it was for us to find a place, when we found the place on Sheridan Square, it had been a nightclub. And my father had recommended we go there to look at it. My father had these clubs, involved in these clubs, 52nd Street, Birdland, and I once had to pay back some money that we borrowed to do a show with some, let's say, dark figures, slanted hats and cigarettes and so forth. And I was to walk up. He was leaning against the building that was Jack Dempsey's restaurant, and I was told, he's going to wear a hat, he's holding a newspaper, he's smoking a cigarette. Just put the $200 in, don't ask him anything, and walk away. Well, it turns out that that whole area that I was living in, my father was working in, was where we are now. It's like I never went away.
Yeah.
The 50, 52nd, 53rd Street.
Where the Circle and Square is today. Well, the book is full of these great stories of the great actors and very evocative of that period in New York artistic life. Journey in the Night, Creating a New American Theater, Circle in the Square, a memoir by Ted Mann, and we're delighted that he's been our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Loewe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Cory and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.